All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's basic Hebrew lesson on this 26th day of March 2023. When we met last week, we were taking a look at Psalm 1, verses 1 through 6, and we had gotten down through verse 2. So just taking a look at this again. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore, the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. And we had seen as we were going through this, that these three lines here, walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, does not stand in the way of sinners, and does not sit in the seat of the scornful. All three of those lines are in synonymous parallelism, basically indicating that the way in which this particular individual is living, he's living in a way that indicates that he has stopped living in the way of those who violate the design of God and has started to live in the way that is in conformity with his design. And as a result, then, because of the fact that this man has done those things, he experiences the blessing of that unalienated relationship with the creator of all that exists. Then when we come on down here into verse 2, the English text would suggest that there is a contrast intended here. But in reality, as we saw when we had come on down into verse 2, that but is not there. That but is actually a because. In other words, this is giving the ground or the reason for why this individual is not walking in the counsel of the ungodly, for why he is not standing in the way of sinners, and for why he is not sitting in the seat of the scornful. Basically, the reason why he is not doing those things is because the condition exists, that's that M there, that the delight of this man is existing continuously. It's that understood imperfect aspect here. And so that would indicate that continuous, incomplete action. So his delight is existing in the law of Yihya, in the design criteria of Yihya. And thus, because of the fact that that is where his delight is, it's demonstrated in the fact that that is where he is yegaing, that is where he is meditating. So his thoughts are always in the law of the Lord and his design criteria, day and night, that continuous idea. And so that was then what we saw when we were taking a look at this. And then coming on down here to verse 3. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. Well, that brings us down here into verse 3. And so you can see that we do in fact have this word here. So, wuhaya. Now, very clearly, once we start taking a look at this, we can see that we do have the triliteral root haya there, which of course would be the cal-perfect third masculine singular of the verb haya, to exist. Then we also have this word, this here on the front of that wow. Now, this particular wow Remember that we have two different types of wow conjunctions. One would be the wow conjunction, and then the other of which is the wow consecutive, where the wow conjunctive is going to indicate simply that two things have been joined together. The wow consecutive indicates that yes, we have those two things that are being joined together, but there's also a certain sequence that is involved. Now, the wow consecutive only occurs on verbs and it has two forms. One of these forms, wow with a pathak followed by a dagesh forte, this is the form that we see most commonly. And this is the form that it will take, the wow consecutive will take on an imperfect verb. But when it occurs on a perfect verb, then it looks like what we have here, a wow pointed with a simple vocal schwa. So thus, I would need to determine then whether or not this wow here is the wow conjunction, because remember that as well is just pointed with a vocal schwa, or if this is a wow consecutive on a perfect. If it is a wow consecutive on a perfect, then it would be joined back to an imperfect verb. And that is, in fact, what we have here. This particular verb, wuhaya, is joined back to the verb yege, which, as you see, it has the imperfect performative on it, the yod in this instance. So thus, here I have a perfect verb being joined back to an imperfect verb, which lets me know that the aspect has switched and that therefore the wow is going to be a wow consecutive. So thus, this here is going to be a wow consecutive, and it is going to switch the aspect of haya from being perfect to imperfect. And that is why you can see that I have translated it here as then he exists being that indication of the imperfect aspect in English. So that then, and so what this is indicating, this condition that exists where this individual is continually having his delight in the design criteria of God, is continuously meditating in that design as well. And then here as well, because of all of that that's going on, he is also continuously existing in the manner which is going to be described uh, in the following clause here. That following clause being introduced by that calf. So that calf here is going to be introducing a comparative clause in this instance. So this here is introducing a comparison. So this man who exists, who has stopped walking in the way of wicked ones, who has stopped standing in the way of violators, and has stopped sitting in the seat of the scornful. So he's stopped doing those things because of the fact that his delight is in the law of the Lord. This is the way that this particular man is going to exist. He is going to exist k'ates. So there's the calf on the word ates, which is the word for tree. As a tree. Well, what type of a tree? Shathul al palge mayim. This word shathul that follows here, this is actually going to be what we would call a cal passive participle. And it is third masculine singular in this instance. And the verb shathal is the idea of to plant. So this tree is one that has been planted. And then where has it been planted? Well, that is answered by the prepositional phrase that follows here. Al palge mayim. Al being the preposition upon. Then next we have palge. So this is basically going to be that Seireyod ending. So masculine plural construct on the word that means rivers. So rivers of Mayim, waters. So this man then is going to exist in a manner similar to this tree, which is existing, being planted upon rivers of waters. And we've all seen those trees that have been planted close to a water source, and we've seen the way that they flourish. And the nature of that flourishing is described even further in this relative clause which follows. So you have asher, relative pronoun, introducing a relative clause telling us more about this tree, which then you have peryo. So this is the word peri, which is going to be the idea of fruit. It's in the construct here being modified by that o, that third masculine singular pronominal suffix there. So the fruit of him, yitain. This word here, yitain, this is going to come from the word nathan, which is the idea of to give. But then I add the yod of the imperfect on it. So that yod being third masculine, and it's singular here, no U class of vowel following. And when that occurs, the yod there is actually going to be the first noon, is going to be closing the syllable. It's therefore vowelous, it assimilates, and thus a dogish forte compensative is placed in the following letter. And so thus we have yitain. So he will give, and then you have bito. And there you can see the beth preposition on that idea of season, and then the third masculine singular pronominal suffix in the season of him. So what we have in this instance, this tree, which exists being planted upon rivers of waters, it's therefore flourishing to the point where it will give its fruit right when we expect it to. So it is healthy, it is reproducing as it ought to. And then look at this here. We'alehu lo yibol. So here you have the wa, which is going to be the conjunction here. Ehu, which is the third masculine singular pronominal suffix. And then you also have the word Allah here, which is going to be, it's very closely related to this preposition that we saw up above. Ke'etz shathul al. So that preposition al being upon. You can actually see the similarity if I go ahead and write it out here. So al, and then this would actually probably be more of ala in that instance. And so the al preposition basically has the idea of something that is upon. And so ale, then these are going to be things that are upon something else. Well, what is it that is upon a tree but its leaves? And so thus you have then, and the leaf of him, lo, there's our negative adverb there. And then we have yibol. And you can see, as I take a look at this, I've got the yod of the imperfect third masculine, no U class vowels. So this is going to be third masculine singular. And notice as well the dogish forte inside of the beth. That lets me know that something has assimilated. So thus we had a noon. That's the most common letter to assimilate. And then that leaves then the triliteral root, naval, which has the idea of to sink, to wither. And so not will sink. So this tree then, that it exists being planted upon rivers of waters. This tree is therefore flourishing. It is healthy and so reproduces as we would expect it to, and the health of the tree is reflected even in its leaves as well. And so that is the picture then, the comparison that we have for this man who is walking as he was designed to walk. That is, he is living his life in that unalienated relationship with his creator, and thus he is flourishing even as that tree flourishes. And then we have here as well, coming down to this, Wukol asher ya'aseh yatzliach. And so notice here, Wukol. So again, we've got that wow conjunction there on the construct of the word kol, entirety. So, and entirety of, well, entirety of what? That's where we get what comes next here, asher. Asher is going to be our relative pronoun which. Because of the fact that it is a pronoun, it is therefore definite, and thus it would make the construct noun entirety also definite here. And that's why I've added that article there. So, and the entirety of which, ya'aseh. Notice here you can see the triliteral root asa having the idea of to do or to make. And then you can also see here that yod of the imperfect. So the yod being third masculine. I look to the end of the triliteral root to see if there is a U class vowel. There's not, so I know this is third masculine singular. Now, I might be tempted to say here that pathak there, because I know that the pathak very often occurs underneath imperfect performatives when the imperfect performative is marking the hifil. So I might be tempted to say that this pathak there is representative of the hifil stem, but that's not what is happening in this instance. Because notice the letter that follows it. The letter that follows it is going to be the ayin. And ayins, like faiths, have a tendency to prefer pathaks before and underneath them. So in reality then, what we had, this was originally just a yod pointed with a hierik indicative of the cow, but underneath the influence of that ayin, the hierik changed to the pathak. So thus this would just be our basic action. So cow, the yod tells me it is imperfect. It also tells me it's third masculine, and I know it's singular, of the verb asa, and thus having the idea of he does. So the entirety of which he does, and well, what is going to happen to that? Yatzliach. Well, here again, notice what happens. I can see my triliteral root, salach, which has the idea of to prosper. Then I can also see the yod on the front of it, which lets me know this is going to be imperfect and also third masculine. No U class vowel at the end, so I know this is going to be third masculine singular. And then notice as well the way that this is pointed. The yod is pointed with the pathak, indicating that this is in fact going to be a hifil, which is confirmed by the presence of the hierik yod following the lameth. So I know then that this is going to be causative action. So this then is a hifil, causative action, imperfect, third masculine singular of the verb salach, meaning to prosper. Notice the furtive pathak there. That's just there to aid pronunciation when we come up to the chait. And so what happens in this instance, we would translate this as he will cause prospering. And this here is still part of this key clause. Notice, how do I know that? Imperfect verb right there, which would go back to the imperfect verb here, which goes back to the imperfect verb there. So all of those then are going to be one with the other. But you can begin to see the picture that emerges here. This man that has stopped walking in nonconformity with the design of God, he exists in the condition of being blessed because the condition exists that he delights in the law of the Lord. He is existing as a flourishing tree, and the entirety of what he does is being caused to be prospered. Why is it that that is prospering? Well, because of the fact that he's seeking to do those things in accordance with the design of God, and thus he's experiencing the blessing associated with that.
I have a question.
Sir.
Can a human experience verse 1 apart from verse 2? Or can a human do verse 2 apart from verse 1?
I would say no. That key clause makes it very clear that all of this here in verse 1 is dependent upon this.
So that is the foundation there for verse 1. So if we look at our lives and we're not experiencing that true blessedness, then there's reason for it. Does that mean that everything's going just perfectly in our lives? Does it mean that we're not going to be affected by the violations of others?
No.
No, it doesn't. But that we know that those others are violating, but because of our walk in Christ, in God, in his design, their violations, no matter what they do to us, I mean, they may persecute us, they may kill us, they may do all kinds of things to us, but that does not change our blessedness in him. And I like the idea that that first word is blessednesses. That's plural, isn't it?
It is.
Wow. So, but you see, so often we experience things that they're not good. It's not a desirable condition in life that we experience. And then we want to ask God, why? Well, God said why in verse 2, because you're not doing this. You haven't stopped walking in the counsel of the ungodly, etc. And because of that, you're not delighting in you're not delighting in my design. See, so many times, Becca, people translate Torah. They say Torah, well, the Torah of God, that's the law of God. They talk about the law of Moses. Well, that's just simple stupidity. That's a lack of understanding. And we have a lot of shall we say, conservative Christianity, which believes that stuff. As I said previously about the man that I talked to last week, pastor of a church, a man who also went to Ambassador Baptist College and went to a seminary somewhere else too, and he has this idea of a dichotomy between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and that's because he never learned the nature of the law of God. So he equates it with this law of Moses, and the idea that you have to do it this way in order to be righteous. And see, I think about how many times, and I tried to fight against it when I was at Ambassador too, the idea that the Bible, the scriptures, tended to be presented as a set of laws, rules that you had to obey to be righteous. Now, I know everybody didn't think of them that way. I know that. But there were some people that tended to present them in that manner. And so that's why, even as dean of students, I had to deal with people coming to my office, and they were always saying, I'm trying to do everything right, but it's not working. Well, it's because you're trying to do everything right, as though it's a conformity to a law that brings righteousness. And I don't know, If people would ever see the person and nature of God in all of this, why would you delight in his design? Because you see him as he is. Why would you want to be meditating, evaluating, as we'd say, mulling over all the criteria of his design? Why would you want to be doing that all the time? Because that's just the way of blessedness. That's just what you do. It's not about doing the things to be righteous. It's about having been righteous because you believe him, because you have caused firmness to him, and thus you delight. But we have a lot who claim to have caused firmness to him, and they don't delight in his word at all, any of his revelation. And they're still teaching, well, that's Old Testament. Yep, that just shows how dumb they are. Truly dumb. But how did you get onto that anyway? So
Psalm 1.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm gonna go off for a minute. Okay.
All right. But yes. And then we come on down here. So we've heard then about this man, this righteous one, this one who has caused firmness to God, and thus is seeking to walk with him as a result of that. And then we're entering into this contrast here in verse 4. Lo Cain, Harishaim. So, Lo Cain, Harishaim. Notice there, lo, which is going to be our negative adverb, not. And then you have Cain. Cain is, wow. It basically, we'll go ahead and we'll say that it is the adverb thus here. There is actually, Cain is related to the verb kun, which is the idea of to establish. And then you also have he, which is basically introducing a ground or reason. That is something that something else is grounded, is established upon. So there's a very close relationship then between ki and kun in that respect. We translate it because, but really it's the idea of something has been founded upon something else. It's been established upon something else. And then we also have k, which is that calf preposition, and we would say as or like. But what is happening when we compare two things? We're saying this is like that. So what we're saying is this thing over here that we are perhaps not as familiar with is like this over here that we are familiar with. And so thus this is then the establishment, the foundation then for understanding more about this. And so thus still related. And then you can see this idea of Cain as well, which we would translate as thus. But basically it's indicating that whatever it is that was established beforehand, that is serving then as the foundation for whatever else follows. So what we're saying here then, Lo Cain Harishaim, not thus, not in this manner that has already been established. Well, what is that manner that has already been established? This manner of being blessed because of having stopped walking in the way of violators, because of the fact that we are delighting in his way and thus are existing as this flourishing tree who everything that he does is prospering. So all of that, not thus, not in this manner that has already been previously described, are existing Harishaim. And this word here, you can see the triliteral root, rasha, which is basically that idea of wicked. It's made masculine plural by that im ending here, and then you have the article there. So not thus are existing the wicked ones. So the ones who are violating the design of God, they are not existing in that manner of having experienced the blessing of God, having experiencing the flourishing associated with conforming to his design and walking with him. Why? Because, so here you have that same structure that we had that when we were talking about the righteous. Because the condition exists there, ki im, because the condition exists, kamots. And here you have that kaf preposition with the pathak and the dagash forte of the article on the word mots, chaff. So these wicked ones, they are not existing flourishing. They are not existing being blessed because of the fact that the condition exists, that they exist as the chaff. Well, what is the nature of this chaff? That is described here in what follows in that relative clause there. Asher tidipenu ruach. So asher, which, and then you can see here, tidipenu. Well, here is the imperfect performative. The tau is going to be the imperfect performative. It's third feminine singular in this instance because wind, ruach, is the subject and it's a feminine noun. And then you can also see the enu, which is going to be the third masculine singular pronominal suffix. And then as well, then you can also notice that dagash forte there, indicating that the noon has assimilated. So you have then this root nadaf, which is basically the idea of to drive away. So which the wind is driving away him, referring back to the mots. So these wicked ones, they are not existing flourishing. They are not existing experiencing that blessing because instead of existing like that tree, they are existing rather like chaff, which is being driven this way and that way by the wind. And so it's not this flourishing picture, it's this picture of something that is unsettled. And then we come on down here. Al Cain. Well, there's that al again, that idea of upon. Cain thus, upon everything that has been established. Because the righteous man, the man who is seeking to conform himself to the design of God, is existing this way, whereas the wicked is existing this way. Upon that foundation, upon thus, lo, not, yakumu. And so here we have then the word kum, stand. Notice the yod there, indicating that it is imperfect, and then the u class of L. So not, they will stand, referring back to the wicked ones. And you can see Rishaim there again. So upon the condition that the wicked ones are existing in this way, that they are existing like the chaff, they will not stand, the wicked ones will not stand, bamishpat. You can see the word mishpat there. This is taking the Hebrew word shafat, which is the noun, which is the verb to judge. And then we have the mem there, which turns it into a noun. So judgment. And then the hey article, hey with the patback, followed by a dagash forte, followed by the beith. The hey of the article drops out, and then the beith adopts the pointing. And so thus we have in the judgment. So these wicked ones, they will not stand in the judgment. The next line helps us to see exactly what the nature of that judgment is. So, wuchataim, so and, violators. So another way of looking at wicked ones. So just as the wicked ones are not standing in the judgment, so too the violators are not going to stand. And where is it that they're not going to stand? Ba'adath Sadiqim. You can see here we have that Baith preposition. It's pointed with the pathak here because originally it was pointed with a vocal schwa, but underneath the ayin we have a composite schwa. Two vocal schwas cannot stand side by side, so the first one lengthens to the nearest short vowel in pronunciation, in this instance to the pathak. So that's the Baith preposition. And then you have the word Ada in its construct form, and this is basically the idea of an ordered assembly. So an assembly that has been gathered together and it's arranged in an orderly fashion. So an ordered assembly of Sadiqim, that is righteous ones. So this judgment that we're talking about, this is the place where that is actually an ordered assembly of righteous ones. And so these wicked ones, because of the fact that they have violated the design of God, they have no standing there. They have no place there. And so thus they're not going to be there. And then what is the ground or reason for why all of this exists? Key. And that is introduced by that key clause, because Yodea. This OA pointing lets me know that this is going to be a cal active participle. So I have an understood verb of existence here, and then I have a participle idea, which is going to be indicating durative action. And it comes from the verb yada, meaning to know. So because Yihya exists knowing, so there's going to be this continuous knowing of the Lord. And what is he knowing? Derek Sadiqim, the way of righteous ones. But then you have Widerek Rishaim, and way of wicked ones, Tovev. And you can see again, you've got the tau on the verb avav, which is going to be the idea of perish, so will perish. So the question then is, what is the nature of this? Very clearly, we've got a contrast that is involved. The way of righteous ones would be a contrast to the way of wicked ones. So we have a contrast here, which also means then that the Lord knowing and perishing are also going to be contrasts as well. So what would the nature of the opposite of perish be? Well, that would have the idea of to establish. So the Lord knowing the way of righteous ones. Well, how is it that he knows the way of righteous ones? He knows the way of righteous ones because he is the one who established the criteria for it. Those criteria are exactly that representation, that accurate representation of his person. And so thus he establishes that way, and it is co-eternal with him. And so he then provides the establishment for the way of righteous ones, that intimate involvement of himself in their way because they are walking with him. But because of the fact that the wicked ones are violating his design, he cannot involve himself intimately in their way, and as a result, that way perishes and is not established by him. And so this then again provides the foundation for essentially all that we have here. And this goes back to the two-headed arrow that the dean has made mention of previously, where when we walk in conformity with his design, there is that blessing. But that violation is going to be destruction there. And so that then is what we see. And there are only two ways.